Hi, everybody. It's JL Rothstein here, author of the Heaven Sent series. My new book, Atonement, is out now on Amazon. You can check it out there, or you can check it on my website at jlrothstein.com. Thank you for tuning in to see my segment, Three Questions With. I have a very special guest with me today, a fellow author, Una Verdandi. So, Una, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you today?
I am very well. Do you want to show us your book? You're here promoting Black Wolf, The Binding of Loki.
I am. So this is my baby, my first baby, my big baby. And it is actually a very long novel. So it's based on the original Norse mythology, based on the prose Edda, the poetic Edda, a little bit from the sagas. And I've done a lot of research on Viking culture to bring it alive because, of course, all the characters, you see what they do.
Yes.
But so much of what happens in the myths just looks absurd to a modern Westerner. But when you understand the logic, the cultural mindset, sort of the moral system, the legal system, it makes a lot of sense. So I really wanted to bring that out, and I really wanted to get away from this Loki as evil thing, because he's not really evil. Tricksters aren't really evil. They're just problematic in all kinds of ways. So I really wanted to bring that out, and to bring the women out as well, because the myths tell the action, but culturally women were a driving force from behind the scenes, from a domestic sphere. They would exert pressure on men because women weren't really part of the political sphere. They were largely restrained to the domestic. But you can do a lot of damage that way. So I wanted to make sure that the women got, a fair chance to be actors as they would have been in Viking society. So that was very important to me when writing Black Wolf. So I hope that people enjoy it. And so far people have, which is good because, like I said, it's long.
Yes, I noticed the thickness of it. So this is quite a number that actually looks like maybe a book and a half to your standard, or possibly
it actually
two.
Would be 3. It's 225,000 words. So.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, just because there are a lot of people who have to die at the end, so they have to be part of the book. Right?
That is great. So your protagonist is, do you have female protagonists that are sort of spotlighted in the book as well?
Absolutely. I think my big player is actually, Sigyn, who is Loki's wife, and she gets very little attention in the myths, so I had to create her from 3 facts. One is that she is she's the mother of Loki's son, Narvi, who is, it's in the myths, but he is killed by his brother. And brother killing brother is basically what triggers the end of the world. So we've already had one fratricide. Now he is used by Odin as a way to resolve that fratricide with another fratricide. But yeah, she is the mother of this boy. She doesn't, well, first of all, she doesn't divorce him. We know that she doesn't divorce him, even though Viking women had the right to divorce unilaterally.
Which is amazing, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, Viking women they weren't equals, but they had a lot of protections and a lot of rights that maybe women in other societies at that time didn't have. So she could have divorced him. And there's, we know that even after Loki, who has now turned to the dark side, this is very late in the story, sort of. There's a general arc of the mythology, but very late, right before Fimbulvetr, the 3-year winter, which ends in Ragnarok. He is bound by the guts of his murdered son, Narvi. And he's bound to this rock with a snake over his head that drips poison on him that's so caustic that it causes him to shudder and scream until the earth shakes.
Oh my goodness.
And she is sitting there while he's bound by the guts of their murdered son, holding a bowl over his head to catch the poison. And it's like, she could have told him to bugger off.
Yeah, for sure.
I divorce you. By that point, she would have had more than enough right to do so.
Right.
And then the third major thing is one line, is a kenning from one of the skaldic poems that refers to Loki as cargo in the arms of Sigyn. And
Hmm.
so to me, that's given, sort of the domestic responsibility that she would have had to care for her husband, that she sort of sticks by him. And I
Yep.
had to use these three things um, to sort of create this whole character. And like, who is she? And what kind of woman would A, marry Loki,
Yeah.
stay married to Loki, right? Um, and I didn't want to make her some little just wallflower, which is not really what you see in the sagas, certainly.
Right.
Like Viking women were tough. So, what kind of woman could really stay married to him? And basically, someone who was at least intellectually his match.
Right.
So, somebody who could keep him interested because he would be, I mean, he's highly intelligent, likes to get into trouble, doesn't, you can't let him be bored. You gotta keep him busy. So, what kind of woman is going to keep his interest? Basically, somebody who can, you
Yeah.
know, tit for tat kind of,
Yep.
she can give as good as she gets. So
Right.
that's the kind of woman I wanted to present. And, all the different women in the stories, all the major women, I tried to give them all different strengths because, of course, in real life, we all have different personalities. We can
Yeah.
exert our own personal strength in different ways, and they're not all distinctly masculine. The way that we treat, like we like the strong women.
Right.
Well, not all women behave like, the hero men.
Right.
And I
Right.
didn't want all my women to be this like uniform, sort of strong woman. I
Yeah.
wanted to have
Well, strong can mean things to different people, right? That to having the strength to match wits, to be politically strong, to be strong-willed. Those are all strengths without being physically strong. And I agree. I think a lot of times when they promote them, especially on TV or in movies, we see the physical aspect, someone able to fight, someone able to wield a sword, but there are obviously a lot of other strengths involved. So that sounds fascinating, and sounds like it does need that many pages when you're going that deep into the mythology. So that brings us to your writing. But before I ask you your first question, I did want to ask, you're an artist. I've seen some of the artwork out there for you. Did you design the cover, or did you go to somebody else for that?
No, my publisher did that. So I mean, the snake symbol is one that you see. It's sort of a modern symbol of Loki. Like it's not a Viking Age symbol, but if you look around the internet, you can find that floating around. But he designed a lot of the other things. Found the background, picked up all the
Yep.
colors. The font is perfect. I was so
Yep.
happy. It was very rune-like, so I thought
Yeah.
I was so happy when he found that. Um, so yeah, no, I didn't do the design. Some of the other artwork though, like the artwork on my website. I mean, I put the website out it was up well before I had a publisher.
Yep.
So the Ravens design that's on there, that's my artwork.
Nice.
And I've got. I'm transferring everything over from Zazzle now to Redbubble, but I do sell things with my prints on. You can get prints or like T-shirts or whatever you want. So I am trying to make. I don't expect to make a lot. I would just like to make my hobbies pay for themselves.
Yes.
You know?
Would we all, right? Amen. We'd all like to be able to pay to be at home doing the things that we love. So that leads us back into our interview questions, which, just to remind the viewers, you sent me the questions, but I don't know the answers, and I love that because I love to be able to hear the answers along with the viewers. So the first question is, what is your favorite thing about being a writer?
Just uh, best thing for me is being able to communicate all kinds of new ideas. I'm very much a theory person. I studied physics and philosophy in university. I mean, my degrees are both in philosophy, but um, coming up with ideas, communicating ideas, being able to discuss these things, um, and of course, writing means that you can do it without interacting with people. Uh, Introverts heaven. So yeah, just being able to get out there, to be able to make a statement. And the nice thing about writing is it stays, right? I always think of the phrase in the Dark Crystal, words. What is writing? Words that stay.
Yep.
So being able to put it on a blog, if I can get stuff published, um, writing email. I mean, now we have, once upon a time you kept everybody's letters, but now of course we have emails, we have notes, messages on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. But being able to communicate that way and to be able to, and also to be able to go over it, and for other people to be able to go over it. Writing to me is not a dead thing. Like you don't just put words on paper and then you're done.
Right.
Like it's not like that. It continues on. They can sort of take on a life of their own as other people, read them and interpret it. And of course, the hard part is trying to always say things in a way that other people will generally not misinterpret. Right?
Mhm.
That can be a tough thing because some people will just
Yeah.
not get it, and some people will deliberately misinterpret you because it's
Yeah.
fun for them or whatever. But yeah, being able to communicate in that way, in a way that is very concise. I mean, I'm standing here babbling,
Yeah.
right?
No, I don't think that's babbling, but do you think that that's a little bit of the academic in you that sort of is
Oh,
geared
very
towards
much
that
so.
and that likes that? So you see that academic sort of that academia coming out inside of you as well. So it's always interesting when I ask people that question because it's a different answer every time for people. It means something different for people. Their favorite aspects of it or something different. So to that end, in talking about writing, do you take an academic approach to the writing? Are you following every step you're supposed to follow? Are you outlining? Are you not outlining? Are you sitting down and sort of writing from your gut? How do you approach the actual writing itself?
The writing, I write however I need to write. Um, yeah, there's still a lot of the academic in me. Like, I mean, a lot of the research and a lot of the sitting down thinking about things. Um, it's, I mean, Black Book wasn't outlined because it follows a general arc of the myths, right? Again, there's the mythology. There are a lot of stories that there's a mushy middle, right? There's a clear beginning. There's a bunch of stuff that kind of happens in the middle. It's not really important what order you put it in. But then you get to the end, and again, there's a very clear progression in the mythology. So when I was writing Black Wolf, I mean, it took a while to sort of ferment. I didn't go out of my way to start, thinking about the myths and start writing about the myths. That was never actually my intention. Sort of the weird story. I mean, I knew very little about the myths until about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe now. I had this book when I was a kid, a little picture book that I can still kind of remember of Thor smashing Thrym's head at his
Yeah.
wedding. Like I remember little bits and pieces, but I couldn't even remember the name of Odin's wife and all the characters. I couldn't remember everybody until one of my friends told my boyfriend he had to make me sit down and watch the Thor movie. At that point, I think only the first movie was out.
I can't imagine as an academic who then went and wrote based on the real mythology that you necessarily enjoyed Thor. Was it more humoristic to you?
Well, at the time I saw it, I didn't really know the myths. I didn't really remember it, right? So for me at that point, it was a movie. Okay, that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Loki's cute. Thor's pretty cute. Like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It was just an action movie. I'm not a big action movie fan because a lot of them I find the characters and the plots are a little bit shallow. They're so action driven that just drives me up the wall. Also, big banging and crashing by the end. I'm like, that was fun. I'm gonna go to a quiet corner now. But yeah, I thought, oh, that was fun. And then I saw this article. I think it was the IO9, like the Gizmodo or whatever the website is, like 8 things Marvel gets wrong about
Yeah.
myths. And I read that, and they had a chunk on Loki, and they're like, Loki is the mother of Odin's 8-legged horse. I'm like, mother of an 8-legged horse. I'm like, sounds like my kind of guy. So I started researching, and very carefully, and I think this is where the academic part for me really came in. So it was all the research that led me up to the book, and then the book just happened. But the research, and I was going to say this because people don't realize just how bad the garbage is on Norse mythology. Of course, the white
Yeah.
supremacists have been usurping it for their own nefarious purposes. But there's a lot of garbage out there. You really want to go to academic sources, because the more solid secondary sources I found, I mean, obviously you go to the primary sources, but solid secondary sources are really important, because I realized looking back, a year after I started, looking back at, oh yeah, I saw that thing online, and it made no sense. It was a total misinterpretation of the myths. A lot of modern interpretation gets put down onto it, and I think that sort of distorts it. And of course,
Yeah.
everybody who doesn't already know the myths fairly intimately is probably coming again at the myths from a position of Marvel, Loki, and
Yeah.
Thor,
Yeah.
which to me fall into the uncanny valley. We're so close and yet so far. Like, and now I can't really. I went back and watched the first movie, and I'm like, oh, oh, looking for like, yeah, that's great. Like Thor smashing the cup and yelling
Yeah.
at the cup of coffee. That was perfect. I'm like, that was total Thor. And then you watch some of the other stuff, you're like, oh, you're enjoying it, and then they go off in this weird, like, no. So yeah, unfortunately, that was it's difficult for me, so I can't enjoy the Thor movies anymore. But yeah, no, the research definitely academic came in. I spent time thinking about how to make all these stories one cohesive story, because they're not
Yep.
one cohesive story.
Right. Right.
And I did have to play around with the myths, and of course I'm agonizing over it, because when you make certain changes, people are going to go, well, that's not what happened. Right? Well, I know that's not what happened, but I need to make a story. Neil Gaiman didn't do that. He was smart enough not to do that. With his story,
Yeah, he has a Norse mythology book. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's just the individual myths on their
Yep.
own in a sort of, again, in a general progression, but not a cohesive story. So
But
you,
like in his poetic way in which he tells a story, right? So it's
right,
like a retelling, the real retelling, but in his sort of voice, if you will. So that
yeah,
was a very interesting read. It's a tough read for me. It's almost a little too much academic compared to the other Neil Gaiman stuff. But I mean, I love him. I read everything that he writes. But yeah, that was. You still heard his voice. Like if you didn't know it was him that wrote it and you were reading it, you'd be like, oh, this is Neil Gaiman telling me this story about this. So very, very interesting. So my last question for you is what advice do you have for new writers, or what advice would you give yourself as your 25-year-old self back when you were first starting out in regard to writing?
I come at my advice actually as an editor, because I've been a professional editor for the last decade.
Yep.
And especially working freelance, when you work with fiction authors, you're not getting the stuff that's been, gate kept,
Yep.
right? You go to a publisher, there's an acquisitions editor who's going to say yes, no, maybe, and then the substantive and copy editors get it. That doesn't happen for me as a freelance editor.
Yeah.
And you try not to take on the stuff that's going to be, you get a look at stuff, and every once in a while something comes up. It's like, no, I'm not taking this, because this is clearly not ready to be worked with. But you get a lot of people who don't understand the writing and editing process. They haven't published before. So you see a lot of stuff that you wouldn't see in.
I think you're
And
trying to be very diplomatic about this answer, but I will say before you finish that I had just recently, so I'm self-published, but I hired an editor to look at my work, and I do a weekly blog, and I had just recently done a blog about the undervaluing of the editing process, because I've never read as much self-published work as I have in the last 4 or 5 months, because I'm trying to be supportive of this community that I've just stepped into. So, I don't have any background in this. I didn't go to school for writing. I'm an accountant. I manage accounting departments in the city. So I didn't have anything, and I wanted to make sure that I went to a professional, somebody in the industry, to get advice, to tell me where I was going wrong. And I looked at the first book like this is going to be about me learning this process, learning what to do, learning what to expect. But I wrote the blog piece because as I read more self-published work, there's almost there's two sides. There's the people that believe you need an editor and you need to go find one and you need to get that advice from someone, whether it's your librarian or your fifth grade teacher. You need somebody else to read this and to edit your work. And then there's the other side that's almost like a badge of honor. Like, oh, I don't need an editor. I didn't get an editor. I'm always a little like, why do you feel that way about this? It doesn't make any sense. These people aren't there to catch your spelling. They're there to make you better. They're there to tell you whether or not this is truly marketable. They're there to elevate you as a writer. That's their whole purpose, is to make you better. And that's been my experience. And that's been the experience I'm telling people, is it's not the proofreading. You're going there for so much more. And you might be here when you start. You want to be here when you're done, and you want to go here in the next one. And I really think that it's unfortunate that this strange negative view of editing, of the whole process of editing in that whole world. And I wonder if where you were going was sort of in that vein, that's what you're finding.
Well, before I actually get on to my advice, I do want to address a couple of things that you said there. And, like one, the people are like, you don't need an editor. Those are the Dunning-Kruger babies. Those are the people who don't understand that they're not even good enough to write, a lot of them. Because when you don't know that you don't know something, you think you know everything.
Right.
And so there are a few, I don't think they're necessarily a large number of people, but there definitely are a few people who don't realize how much better their writing could be, or maybe, they just don't get it. But there's also, and this is a thing that haunts professional editors, and so like the Editors Canada, or National Association of largely freelance editors, has been trying to find ways to, like in the last decade, they've introduced various accreditations to try to, which is not easy to do. But there are people who waltz out of their undergraduate in English literature and say, well, I'm going to be an editor.
Yes.
Well, you have some of the basic skills, but maybe you don't actually understand what editing means.
Right.
There's so much more to it than just rewriting what somebody else said or saying, no, this is wrong. And I think some people, because there's sort of been this wild west of publishing in the last 20 years, there are some people who hang out a shingle as editors who really aren't qualified to be editors, and they create a backlash against those of us who are, professionally trained. We're members of associations. We work together to try to bring editing to the masses and get paid. So that happens too, where people, well, this editor screwed up my book, and maybe some of it's just sour grapes. Maybe your book wasn't that great, and you're not emotionally in a place where you feel like you can handle that criticism, and it is hard. I'm going to be bloody honest. I've had to give like some incredibly hard words to people, and you've got to sit there and go, like, how am I going to tell you this in a way that you're going to accept my advice and use it in a constructive way? And that is really hard. And there are a few people who maybe aren't ready for that. I find most of the time my clients will. You work with them, you say, look, because I believe, if I believe you can do better, I will push you to do better. And it's going to suck. And you're probably going to want to throw darts at my picture, and that's okay. Do that if you have to. Because
I could only tell you about my own experience. I went into it with an open mind. So I hired a woman who's been editing for 25 years. I found her through Reedsy. I had looked up for reviews. I had looked up credentials. I had done my homework to find her. And she took the book, and the first thing she said to me, she said, this is going to be hard for you because this is not your world. You are not a writer, and I am going to push you, but I will do it in the nicest way possible, but I am going to do it. So as long as you're okay with that, then we can work together. And I was like, okay. And even though you say okay up front and you're sort of ready, you're not really ready. Like it came back, and when I saw the number of red lines, and obviously this is on Word, so you're using the red lines. I mean, I just shut the computer and went and got a glass of wine. And I said to my husband, I don't think I'm smart enough to do this. And he's like, you're being ridiculous. You didn't read it. You didn't look at it. She said she's doing this for your own good. Finish your glass of wine and go back. It was like one of
Right.
those experiences, but it was really hard. And there's the ego piece, but then there's the other piece that it feels a little overwhelming when it's that amount that you have to go through after you just poured your heart out on a piece of paper. But I will say, after it was done and after I put it out, I couldn't have been more proud because of how much I had grown. I saw it. Like I literally saw it afterwards. I was like, wow. And she even came back and she was like, I have to say, I'm so proud of you because you did everything I told you to do. You took everything I told you and did it and applied it. And your writing is just that much better. And I hope that you just keep going, that you just keep taking this approach on the journey. And that's when I realized there is no I'm all done, like I've learned and I know everything. Like that's never going to happen. It's going Every book is going to be something else that you're going to learn to make you better. And I wish that everybody took that approach, because I think the self-publishing industry in particular has sort of a negative connotation to it, because there is a lot of material out there that really shouldn't maybe have ever gotten to the point where it's actually published, and that is sort of drawing down the industry. And I hope that people, take it upon themselves to elevate it, to bring it into where you would want it to be. And that's my hope anyway. And that's why I've been sort of, advising people to go to an editor and don't undervalue that step.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole other discussion. I'd be happy to have another talk with you about that at some point. But I got to tell you, like, yeah, like what you said, it is hard. You're not ready. It's like being a parent. Like if this is your first book, it's going to be like your first baby. You've got the crib, you've got all the diapers and everything, but that kid shows up and cries at 3 o'clock until 5 o'clock, and you can't do anything about it, and they won't eat. And like you're never going to be ready for that. You just have to brace yourself and go in. And one of the things that bugs me, and here's where I'm going to get into my advice. I'm going to put it loosely as scare quotes, because I actually really hate when people try to give rules and absolute writing advice. You must do this and you must not do that. And like I hate this whole 3-act thing. If it works for you, use it. That's great. But it's not a rule.
Right.
It's not every movie that follows that structure works well. And not every movie that works well follows that structure. Likewise with books. I mean, this is an entirely different medium.
Right.
But I see people using that. They have to use that. And what I think is happening, and again, this has been sort of the culmination of, the wild west of publishing. Now that everyone can publish, and there's smaller publishers, and it's easier to find a small publisher, self-published, whatever, and it's very expensive if you're self-publishing. You try to do it right, it costs you a pretty penny. So of course, people are always looking for ways to cut corners, and there is, advice is a big business, like advice books. And I've seen them ruin people's writing. I have seen people destroy their writing trying to follow someone else's rules. Because what's happening, I think, is that everybody now sees that there's an opportunity to publish, or things. We don't have the big gatekeepers. They're not, they can't hold back the floods anymore.
Right.
So more people see the opportunities to publish. More people are putting out their writing. They don't necessarily know the industry. They don't necessarily, having not published before, they don't really understand how the whole editing process works, how the publishing and marketing process works. So they're just going into it blind. And as far as the writing goes, they're looking for the people who are going to tell them how to get the best result. But there is no one way. And I think people, they take these rules so seriously. But it doesn't necessarily work for their story. Maybe it doesn't work for their style of writing at all.
Right.
But you don't know that until you've gotten in there. And they're going to these books because they're not feeling confident.
Mhm.
But if it doesn't work, if the rules fail them and their work still isn't all that great, that just leads to a total sense of despair because they're like, I
Right.
followed the rules and it's so bad and I don't know what to do. And that
Right.
it just makes them want to give up. And my advice is to not take any advice as an absolute. If you're looking for writing books, like you're going to the library, you're going to chapters, whatever it is, you're looking for, like just read everything you can, but take nothing as absolute. Writing is a skill like any other, and one of the reasons I think everyone believes they can write a book is because everyone can write a sentence. We can all
Right.
put stuff on paper, but writing a good story is so much more than that. And it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes feedback,
Yeah.
and it takes accepting feedback and working with people who are willing to give you and able to give you constructive feedback. And, you know, there's no shortcut. There's no
No.
one advice book. There's no Bible of writing,
No.
right? I mean, if you're going to go into making art, you have to accept there's a high level of risk, of failure of some kind. And you have to do it because you love it. By all means, chase that dream of being a big writer. But recognize that it's full of challenges. And of course, everyone and their brother is publishing.
Yeah.
So learn to follow your develop. Well, first of all, learn to develop your own instincts about what works for you as a writer. Rules or no rules, you know. Uh, Find the people who can give you good constructive feedback, maybe editors or friends, colleagues, whoever. And no, the thing is with taking feedback is that I mean, obviously editors are trained and experienced in giving, like, identifying problems very specifically and addressing them and telling you here are the things that you can do. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you come up with something absolutely, new, and you send it back to them, the reviewer, and they're like, holy shit, I've had that happen so many times. And it's like, yeah, it's like you just did something totally amazing that I wasn't expecting. But yeah, being able to take that. And if you're going to like beta readers and whatnot, like people who are not professional editors, um, you know, take their stuff with a grain of salt. I mean, you don't want anyone telling you what they would do or wouldn't do, but recognize that most people just don't know how to couch this advice.
Hmm.
Is there something valid in the advice, whether or not they would do it or whether or not they liked it? Because sometimes people just, there's something there, but they can't quite pinpoint what it is for you. So,
Right.
consider them sort of like your little flashlights and consider all that. So, be prepared to do all that, but just basically learn to take the risk. Like, learn to just take that leap,
Yep.
to take in all the advice you can, to do your best to synthesize it, to use it when you think it's best. It's a recursive process. You will get better. And
Yeah.
right, like you talked about, like although the process you get to putting the book out, and I don't know about you, but I'm still editing Black Wolf in my head. That's something you're like, I don't think I should have wrote it that way, right? And you
Well,
can
you're
keep
supposed
doing
to
it.
put that behind you, though. You're supposed to not critique after it's out. You need to take those lessons and roll forward and put it into the next book. Will there be another book from you? Will there be a sequel? Will there be another story of this kind or something different?
I've got something sort of slowly working in the background, and I mean, it is. I would call it a companion book to Black Wolf, and I don't know if it'll ever actually get. I talk about it publicly. I don't know if it'll work out well enough to actually be worth publishing. Um, but the idea came as I was in the last stages of editing Black Wolves to do a companion book that takes place from the perspective of the Jotnar, the giants. Because in the mythology, there are all these beings who get one or two mention in the
Mm.
myth.
Yep.
They don't play big roles, but they give you this interesting look at the other side of life. And I mean, a lot of the modern interpretation of the Jotnar is that they're beings of chaos, right? So you have the gods, the Aesir, who are beings of order and lawfulness, yada yada. And then the Jotnar, who occupy this other sphere and who could try to come in and destroy,
Yep.
and who eventually succeed. Um, but when you actually look at the myths, They lead the same lives as the gods. They follow the same rules of hospitality. Sometimes they break them. More often than not, they break them. But I mean, so do the gods actually in the
Yeah.
story of the building of the wall, right? I mean, how they get the wall without having to pay the builder. They broke their own contract.
Yep.